Hello and welcome back to Rocket Pod. On today's show, we're joined by Fergus Dyer-Smith. Fergus is a serial entrepreneur, a surfer, and the founder of Wooshii video digital agency. Wooshii helps corporations scale their video production and marketing capabilities. I first met Fergus a few years ago. He's been a mentor to me. I love the way his mind works. He's always getting to the root of the problem and a master marketeer. So yeah, really looking forward to learning what makes Fergus tick and delving a little bit more into his entrepreneurial journey and kind of what drives him as a human. Welcome, Fergus. So how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm at home, so that's always good. Work from home a fair bit, as everyone does, I guess. That's not saying that now. It's not an unusual event, is it? Saying you're working from home. But yeah, so I'm good. Yeah, very good. Glad to be here.
So just to give that's great. Just to give our listeners a flavour for kind of where you came from. Maybe go right back to kind of your upbringing. Yeah. So, and also maybe talk about some individuals that have made a kind of an impact on you in your early life, and kind of bring it forward to, where you are today. And then we can kind of talk a little bit more about what you're currently doing and, kind of what drives you really as an entrepreneur and a human.
So where am I from? I'm not really from anywhere. I moved around a lot when I was younger. My father was everything. He sort of started off as a sailor. He was a Coast Guard, farmer, psychologist. Ended up as a psychologist. So I sort of was born in Reading, but I've lived all over the UK, the UK essentially. But then when I was about sort of 14, landed in the northeast. So I was up Newcastle way. I then moved. Then when I was 18, went off to sort of when everyone left home and went off to university. I went off to Botswana and ran a school there for a couple of years.
Wow,
teaching agricultural science. It wasn't quite a couple of years. It was a year and a bit basically. But yeah, so that was probably the most. I think that had pretty large impact on me as an individual. Came back, went to uni. Originally thought I was going to go into sort of genetics and biochemistry. That was the thing that I sort of went to study in Manchester. I can't say that I went with any great drive to be a formidable scientist. I think I was more interested in just being in Manchester. It was sort of like the 90s. So if you can imagine, it was like late days of the Hacienda and clubs were a big deal. Ecstasy was a big deal. There was just a lot of things going on. So I thought I knew that I didn't. I always thought that I wasn't on a traditional track. I could never imagine myself in a job as such. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. I really didn't have any clear idea of where I wanted to go. Unlike my own kids, who seem to be absolutely set and know exactly what they want, which I find very distressing. But I was just floating around really. Then what happened, now that I think about it, was the internet came along, and that happened. Well, it had already happened really when I was at uni, but it was very early days of the internet, which basically definitely ages me. But it was like, Yahoo, and I just got immersed in that. In part, I think it was just an excuse to be able to do something other than biochemistry. When I was at uni, I could sit in the computer lab and sort of dick around on the internet.
That's distraction.
It was brilliant. I was absolutely taken with it. And so when I left, this was just before the dot-com bubble. Well, it was sort of like as the dot-com bubble was growing, but it was before it burst. When I left uni, it was sort of, well, what are you going to go and do now? And then now thinking about it, then I read a book called, it was something like How to Be an Entrepreneur. I didn't actually know what entrepreneur meant, but I picked up this book, read it, and one of the things it said was you should read other books of other entrepreneurs, biographies and things like that. So I got into that, and I think that sort of captured my imagination. So I decided that's what I was going to do. Like completely the wrong way around. It wasn't like I found a problem and thought, I'm going to go and solve that problem. And it ended up being like, no, it was the other way around. I'd read this book read these books of other people that had done great things and thought, oh, that sounds easy. Not easy. It just sounds like fun. Anyway, so I started a little web I'd already started this anyway. There was this sort of like little web development agency in the early days of the web, and like straight out of the gate, want to deal with BNFL up in Cumbria.
Okay.
And it was just more money than I'd ever seen in my life. You know, I came from my family's not particularly well off. You know, we all lived in a room in my grandmother's house for quite a long time, and we never had money. So I've never been particularly money driven because we never had any. But when this deal came along, I thought, holy crap, I'm the bee's knees. So that was good. And then I moved. I'd actually moved away from Manchester after leaving the uni, and I went to came back because my wife, now my wife, had got a job down in Manchester, so I sort of followed her back, and then ended up bumping into a guy who I ended up becoming a business partner with for a number of years in Manchester, and we built a tour operator for students, essentially sending students all over the place. And out of the back of that came a big snowboarding music festival called Snowbombing, which is huge today now. Can't say I had a huge amount to do with the size that it got to, but I was there. You know, we founded it, started it, grew it for the first few years, and it was reasonable by the time I sort of decided to spin out of that. But that was great. I mean, that was literally baptism by fire. It was okay. We're going to drop you into this situation. You've got no money. Every funny story or mad story that I have of running a company comes from that sort of 4-year period, which was just it. When I think about that time, it was awful. At the time, it was awful. It was hell.
Crazy.
I'd made loads of mates, and we all worked out this coach house, and it was, continually bombarded with debt collectors, and never had any money to pay anybody. But we were running this massive music festival and sending students all over the place. There's a story I always tell. This is sort of dates it. So there was this one time when we decided it was the Berlin Love Parade. I think it was the second Berlin Love Parade or something. We decided we were going to send all these students off to the Berlin Love Parade. And, I think it was also the same day as the British Grand Prix. There was some other big event happening in the UK. Anyway, the coach company that we'd hired to sort of take all these students over there went bust the day before. And what we should have done in retrospect is obviously cancelled the thing, reimbursed everyone. But we'd spent all the money. So we had no money to reimburse anybody with, which at the time, thinking about it, I think at the time wasn't 100% legit, because actually the money should have been sitting in, I can't remember how it worked. There was some sort of trust that it was a bit like, it wasn't ABTA, but there was a similar thing that we were part of. Anyway, we were just young kids, didn't know what we were doing. So we decided, first thing we thought was, well, we better go and get another coach company. So this is the dating part. So, today you get on the internet, you sort of run through, try and find all these coach companies, get in touch with them. No, you couldn't do that. I had to run to the local library, get all the yellow pages, go through all the yellow pages, rip out the from across the country, because obviously we only had yellow pages for the local area. Rip out all the pages that were coach companies around the country, ring all these coach companies, desperately try and find a coach company. But anyway, in the end, we had to send them on trains, and then the story just gets more calamitous as it goes on. It was an absolute mental disaster from our side, but from the guys that went, I think probably still to this day, they think it's probably one of the most mental trips they ever went on. They loved it in the end. It was like, but it was mental. It was sort of, getting on.
How interesting.
Yeah.
So do you think so you mentioned your father being a farmer and a teacher and that serendipitous psychologist, you said, so he had quite a serendipitous or quite a varied career.
Yes.
So your interest or kind of courageous to try different things. And did you have an aptitude for the sciences and how things worked, or is it something that you felt that was a good career move? I'm just thinking, just trying to tie it together.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mix, really. So my dad was, he's still alive, but he was a very intelligent guy. And it's, when he was young, his father was an admiral in the Navy. So he had that sort of I guess, hanging over him a little bit. And something happened when he was 16, 17. That I don't actually know the story correctly, but something happened that meant that he didn't get his, I think it was called 16 plus in those days or whatever, to get to grammar school or whatever it was. And so he ended up having to, he was sort of signed up. You know, you could sign your kids up to the Navy in those days. And so he was signed up Merchant Navy. And off he went. But he was always super smart and super bright. But he just, so he, you know, he saw the world in the Merchant Navy. And when he got married, obviously didn't want to be away. So then he had to find something else to do. And so then he was just doing whatever needed to be done to keep, you know, the wolf from the door sort of thing. But he studied all through these times to become a psychologist. So he got his degree through an OU degree, happened to land a job at a very prestigious institution, and then slowly, by the time he ended his career, he was well known and well regarded in the field that he was an expert in. But you know, he was always technical. Like, we had a computer very early on. We were one of the first people to have like a computer I can remember. But I was always technically minded, scientifically minded. Although I'm also quite, my mother's sort of an artist, so I had that element in me as well. So saw a lot of things, you know, but they never really pushed me to do anything. It was like they always left me alone, never pushed me on my homework or anything like that. But
that's interesting. Yeah, even that's interesting. So you had the, I guess, freedom to figure things out on your own.
Yes and no. I mean,
or had the time to kind of develop that creativity, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about, like, there was definitely an inherent inside me. There was definitely an inherent sort of desire to make them happy with what I was doing. But they never said you must go to university and you must do this. That was never said. But I think I probably went and did sciences because I thought, well, I know I can do it.
You're good at it.
Yeah, I'm sort of good at it. I wouldn't say I loved it. It was just I was good at it, and I wanted to go to Manchester. That's the honest truth. At the time, I was really into, you know, I was in a band, and music was the thing that I absolutely loved. But it just felt like, yeah, but that's there's no, you know, there's no surety in that. Turns out there's no surety in anything, but I only know that now. But at the time, it felt a lot more risky. So I sort of went the safety path. But also, you know, I'd gone off, like I said, I went off to Botswana, and I spent time there, and so I had to make a decision around university whilst I was out there, and I wasn't really thinking about it, to be honest. I just sort of filled in the paperwork, sent it off. It was like, okay, well, that's the next step. That'll keep me out of a job for 3 years. So I just, you know, it's not very inspiring.
No. I'm sure it was a bit of a culture shock. I mean, Botswana
it was actually. Well, the reverse was worse. Going there was fine. Coming back was worse.
It's harder.
It was harder. Yeah, I struggled when I came back. I wouldn't say I loved university. I didn't mind it, but it felt quite like I was sort of, I don't want to sound patronizing, but it was like, it all felt a bit like everyone was going out for the first time, getting drunk and all that sort of stuff. Not that I didn't. I definitely participated, but it felt like that was everyone else's first day away from home. And I'd been away, you know, living in another country on my own. In those days, I spoke to my parents once in a year, you know, and had to communicate through written letters. So it'd been a different time for me. But yeah. I just sort of floated around. That's what I was sort of saying. It was more about optionality. It was like, well, how do I just keep my options open for as long as possible? That was basically, now looking at it in retrospect, probably what was going on. It's just, I just didn't know. So, okay, let's just keep the options open and see what happens.
Try different things and then, and had the wherewithal to actually try things without any guarantee of them working.
Yeah, most things I just fell into, you know. So like I ended up at outgoing and snowbombing because the guy that I ended up working with at that time was, you know, I bumped into him. He needed a website doing. I think I got introduced to him from a guy that had worked in a bar when I was at uni, and so he needed a website. I was one of the few people that could do websites, so I built his website. And at the time, I had this sort of little web agency, and with it, which is, there you go. There's another. So with retrospect, I should have stayed on that track because I would have made an absolute mint. But I just didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't get the idea of scalability and, you know, markets. I was just this kid just bumming around. Yeah,
that's really. So would you say, so you mentioned your father, were there any other, I know you mentioned you read this book, that was kind of your first introduction to entrepreneurship. Did someone recommend the book or did you just find it?
No,
is there anyone else that would?
I was always a massive reader. I spent a lot of time in libraries because as I mentioned, my parents didn't have a lot. We didn't have a TV. So
Okay.
one of the things that everyone still remembers to this day, which I just don't like, all my friends remember that I didn't have a television. It's hilarious. Because I completely forgot that I never had a TV, but everyone else remembers that I was the guy that didn't have a television. But so I never had a television. It wasn't like I never watched television, but I just we didn't have one in my house, didn't have a car. So, I spent a lot of time in libraries because they're free. And so, I could use them as a base. And so I just would read stuff, and I'd still read a lot today, but this was just something, I don't know why I picked it up. I just picked it up and started reading it. I can't remember what book it was. I don't think it was anything spectacular. It was just, I remember I did read Branson's biography. That's one that sort of stands out as one of the ones that really captured my imagination, because he's quite a good storyteller. And I guess everyone now knows his story. But at the time I was fascinated by his tales. Of course, it was music related as well. So that caught me. But yeah, I sort of lived in my imagination quite a lot, I think.
Okay. They do say that, I mean, obviously having mentors is great. But if you don't have access to people, then books are the next best thing, and you can learn anything. I know since the internet has kind of exploded, there's so much information out there. But it's a really good point. And you also made the comment that I thought was interesting, that, because you didn't have a lot growing up, monetarily, you didn't necessarily measure that. It was more about the trying new things, the creativity piece. You mentioned you're obviously an avid reader, and you kind of found your way that way. It's a real contrast. Well, the information world we live in now, that it's almost like, how can you even have time to think? Because you're bombarded so much the whole time.
Well, I don't. I mean, it is different. I don't think it's necessarily negative. I sort of look at it and think it's fantastic. But you're right. You can learn anything from anywhere now, especially now. It's, I think Elon Musk has a quote which is something like, learn information and learning is free. You go to university to learn how to do your chores. Something like that. I've just completely annihilated it. But he's basically got a point. It's like, if you want to. You can today go and learn absolutely anything you want to learn if you've got the wherewithal to do it, because the information's there and it's free. So, most universities, with universities, I often think their model is it's messed up now, because, you used to have to go to a place where the expertise was to capture the information that was most up to date. Most universities now are behind the wave of information. They're having to catch up themselves because everything else is pushing forward so quickly. And so you go to university, you're probably learning information that's outdated by the time you get it. Then you're paying for the privilege to learn that information. Technically, you could get that information for nothing. Most universities give it away for free. What you get is the seal of approval at the end. So you sort of you pay in this country, you pay 30, 40 grand to get the certificate, basically. And in other countries it's even more to get the certificate. I think there's a business, actually, and I've thought this for a while, is that if you take Harvard, Stanford, these big universities, which really are just big endowment funds, they're just massive money churning machines. So they've got huge endowments, huge sort of investment funds. They have to keep filling those funds. So the way they do it is they make their education exclusive. So, but they actually do put out a lot of their courses for nothing on the internet. So anyone can go and do a Harvard degree or a Stanford degree. You just can't get the Stanford approval at the end. So you do it for free, but you don't get the Stanford approval. What someone should do is go and create a sort of pseudo Stanford examination board or a pseudo Harvard examination board and give it away for it's $1,000. You go and learn it. We'll test you up to their standard, and you get this our certificate, which is to the same level, and just because
stamp.
Exactly. The idea that Stanford and Harvard are all about educating the world is absolute bollocks. Because if that was the case, they just anyone could go and do their degree, and anyone would get the stamp. No, they need the exclusivity, because otherwise, how do they can't drive the level of value that is perceived. So it's a bit of a misnomer, that. But anyway,
it's funny. So it sparked a memory for me. So I joined a kind of a technology firm in the health, was it healthcare information technology firm in Boston when I got married an American and spent the first 13 years of my adult life in the States. But I was the first person they'd hired that didn't have an Ivy League education. So a lot of them had Harvard MBAs and the MIT, on the tech team. And I was really, really excited to join this team of like superior beings. Like as far as I could learn from and actually I was really a little bit disappointed because they weren't really any smarter than I was. And I was, I mean, okay, they were in some ways, and they had that education, and, they obviously could probably read a spreadsheet much better than I could. But I was really disappointed. But also I felt good. I felt good about myself. But I think
I got a friend who actually works at he was part of a fund. I'm not going to say the name of the fund, but he was asked. He's Brit, but he comes from an Asian family, so he's second generation or something. But he's like really good mate of mine. And he was asked by the head of this fund to explain to all the new recruits that they were bringing in their inclusion policy. And so with a completely straight face, he sort of stood up and said, "Yeah, well, we've got a very strong inclusion policy here. We like to have someone from every house at Cambridge."
Brilliant. It's funny, isn't it? It's that glass ceiling. Well, in fact, no, I did bump up against the glass ceiling in this particular firm. But anyway, so just another thing, just one thread that I wanted to pull out. So, and this is really, I guess you can apply it to young people, but children especially, but also just listening to your experiences. It's almost like if you have time to be, like if there's, structure is good, but there's not too much structure. It's almost like if you have time to develop your own ideas, and it sounds like you had that time, and you spent a lot of time in the library and you read, but it seems like you had that. There wasn't any pressure on you to do a certain thing. Your parents obviously wanted you to follow your heart by the sounds of things, and you figured it out. But that's one thing that I think kids and young people, they don't have enough time to play. I mean, that play time and that fun time, just idle, being bored sometimes is good.
Yeah, I'm always a bit I always think it's really hard looking, when you look back, when you sort of try and look at generations below you or whatever and say, oh, there's this and that issue and there's this issue and there's that issue, because that's happened forever and a day. It's like every generation, as they go forward, look back at the generation below and sort of have some criticism or some issue with what's going on with it. And I'm never sure that actually that makes A, any difference, or B, they're right. It's just, because I'm judging the world on my experience of it, and there are some similarities with people my age who have gone through similar things, who have a similar view. It doesn't make us right. It's just like my parents had a slightly different view to me. So I say my parents didn't force me, but there was a sort of unsaid type of. It wasn't ever overtly said, but when I really think about it, there was definitely a sort of. If I'd said to them I was just going to go and, I don't know, walk the earth or whatever, there may have been a bit of an issue. But, so it's, I find with young people, the one thing that, there's a few things that I wish I'd known, but perhaps if I had known them, I wouldn't be where I am today. Or perhaps I'd be, I'm not suggesting that I'm in any way where I want to be necessarily, but it's a really hard thing looking down at generations, because you're just so biased with your own upbringing and your own situations, and who flipping knows what they've got to go through. But I'd say that if you can find the things that you value, it's about finding what's important to you over and above what other people think is important. I think that probably holds true for everybody.
No, that's nice.
It took me 35 years to work out actually what I was optimizing for. And for me, it's freedom. Like, I value my freedom over money, over goods or things, over everything else. What I've realized retrospectively, so this is a bit of a sort of Steve Jobs connecting the dots in retrospect, is that everything I've done has always been what's going to give me the most control over my own life. So I've never had a job, really. in the sense that I've never worked for something. I have actually. It's not 100% true. I have once had a job where I worked for somebody else. I lasted a year. He was a very big, successful entrepreneur, and if anything, I sort of took it because of that reason. I sort of wanted to see how he'd done it. So I've never had that. I've always sort of been master of my own destiny, or I haven't had a job, in which case I've been miserable because I've been broke, but at least I've been able to, if I decided I wanted to go off somewhere, I could just go off. I mean, it's just, so that was if I was younger, I'd be sort of thinking, what is it that, but it's such a hard question to ask, isn't it? It's like, it's one of those things that comes to you as you get perhaps older, because when you're younger, you're just sort of bombarded with information. And I suspect, one thing certainly for sure is that the attention economy, as they like to call it, has become, when I was younger, there was plenty of time to sit around and think, or sit in libraries, or, have your brain go off on one. There's not much opportunity to do that today. You can't even stand in a queue without being entertained. So it's like, you're literally, from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, something has your attention. So unless you force gaps in that, then there's less gaps for things to go on. But
maybe that's where the discipline comes in. But it's also awareness, isn't it? Where you're spending your time. Yeah. But they do say that kids today they got a higher IQ than our generation because of all the information. I mean, there's probably more benefits than cons. It's just, as you get older, I think you probably realize that maybe you need to not do so much social media or whatever it is, whatever your thing is. It's just having. I hope so. But we can't always control that, can we? I mean,
God no.
we think
I'm a flipping disaster. It's like I turn that thing on, and it's like you go, I've just 5 minutes, and it's like I've worked out with TikTok that I'm sure their algorithm works in 30-minute chunks, because every time I turn it on, it doesn't matter how, it's 30 minutes before I go, oh shit, I should probably get off this. And if I go again, that's another 30 minutes. So it's like I completely have to resist that thing. So So I understand. So you like to surf? Is that so? I think you mentioned that in the past. So what do you do for fun? So you talk about this life balance. Yeah, surfing is. I mean, surfing's a huge part of my life. Because with this, when I ran, basically what happened was when I was running snowbombing, and we were running this tour operator. Obviously, it was around the snowboarding industry. So we really came to be when snowboarding was a big deal. Essentially, snowbombing, the original idea was, if you went skiing or went on a snowboarding holiday, the après ski was always, ABBA and that sort of stuff. And we worked in our offices. We had all these sorts of big club nights that sort of were around us, and we were in that world in Manchester. So we knew all the people that ran, like Cream and all these big club nights, Bugged Out, Gatecrasher, these sorts of places that you might know. Your listeners might not. But anyway, so we took them all to the Alps basically, and said, right, and they would put on nights, and so it was boards by day, beats by night. That was the idea. So I was around all these snowboarders and all the rest of it. And as a consequence, surfing was, the brands that are in snowboarding are also typically in surfing. So we get all the time in the office, like clothing and magazines, and there'd be the snowboarding stuff, and then on the other page would be someone on a beach with a pair of board shorts and a board. And I always thought that just looked miles better than standing on a mountain. So when I left, I sort of thought I must have been late 20s, thought I really want to have a go. And so I I think I started surfing in Scarborough, which is probably not the best place to start surfing because it was pretty awful. But I
didn't even know you could surf in Scarborough.
Yeah, you can. There's quite a Cape Bay and South Bay, North Bay. Like the three beaches there. Actually, South Bay gets all right. It's not bad. It's bloody cold, but and so I had come across it a little bit when I was in South Africa as well. And so I just started, and then I was hooked. At that point, then thought, how can I engineer it so I can surf every day? Didn't want to surf in Scarborough every day. So me and my wife moved to Portugal. And bought a house on the west coast of Portugal. And we lived there for 7 or 8 years.
Really?
So we had one boy who was 2, 3, and then we just had we just had another son, so he was 4 months, and we just packed everything up in a camper van and drove over there. And originally thinking we'd be there for about a year, and ended up being there for about 8 years. But as a consequence, then I was surfing every day. I was like, up at 6, surf for 3 hours, sometimes 3 times a day. It would just
Really?
waves were good. I would go every day, almost all day, much to my wife's despair. In the early days, with young children, it created a few issues, but yeah, I love it. I mean,
but you love it,
and I still, over the years, I didn't quite surf as much, because what happens with surfing is, with everyone, I think, is you get completely addicted. All you think about every waking hour is surfing, and that for about 5 years, and then it starts to calm down. You start to get a little bit more like, maybe not today. It's not quite, the waves aren't quite there, and you get a little bit more soft. But I still, so I still have my house in Portugal. Still go there, every 6 weeks or so. Still go surfing.
So why Portugal? Do you have any connections
best waves
there,
in
or?
Europe. It was warm
Okay.
and hot.
Okay.
The weather was good. It's beautiful in winter.
Yeah.
We'd gone on holiday there and just found a plot. I mean, we literally went on holiday, found this place that we liked. We're walking around, saw this plot, put a deposit down on it a week later, got the builders in
Right.
4 weeks later. It was just
Right.
like that. It was thinking about it now, I'm not sure I'd have the bravery to do it now, but yeah, it was just like, and it just ended up there.
As far as the activity of surfing, do you see, do you draw connections with entrepreneurship? Can you talk about I mean, you have that time on the water to think. You're catching waves. Do you either catch a good one, or can you talk a bit about that?
It's not. It's.
Is there any philosophical thoughts around that and your entrepreneurship journey?
Yeah, lots.
That'd be interesting.
Surfing is, well, first of all, in terms of as an activity, obviously it's physical, so that's good.
Mm-hmm.
It's slightly different to some activities. So, if you have a creative problem that you want to work on, often, you need to get into a state where your subconscious can sort of come out. And so the sort of activities that are good for that, for me, are, I don't know, going for a run, going out on the bike, sometimes going for a walk, but it's got to be something where you need enough sort of conscious activity that you can't be doing anything else. So you have to, if you're on a bicycle, you sort of, unless I guess you listen to something, but I would never do that. So you're on a bike, you're cycling, you need somewhere with all to sort of control it, but you don't have to focus on it because it just sort of comes naturally. And what happens is, after about half an hour, the problem starts to falter around and ideas just start coming to you. And at some point, there's a strong likelihood that you'll go, oh, hang on a sec, that might work, And so that's that. Surfing's not like that. Surfing's a lot more like everything leaves your brain. So because all you're focused on is either the wave you're on or the wave that's about to pound you on the head, and you haven't got time or space to think about anything else. So it was great because I actually started my current company whilst I was there. It was, all the stresses again came back, but I could go surfing, and I used to sort of describe it as like the first wave that went over your head was like a big sort of wash, and it would just wash away all the crap from the day. And then you couldn't think about it, because if you thought about anything else, you were going to get nailed. So that's one element of it. I also love this sort of thought of every wave that comes, whilst they all have similarities, they're all completely different, and they'll never exist again. So they've traveled across this entire ocean. So, when a wave hits a beach, it's come from the middle of the Atlantic, if you're in the Atlantic, obviously, traveled, hundreds of miles through the water, built up. It hits the beach, or hits the break, or hits the reef, or the point, or whatever. You manage to catch a little bit of that energy, and it's gone. Will never come back again. And it's sort of, I love that sort of, I guess there's something in there. I don't know what's in there, but that idea I've always thought is, it's quite magical, really.
That's really interesting. So, okay. So you said you started your current company. So for those listeners out there, Fergus is the founder of Wooshii. That's going to be on the introduction anyway. But so tell us a bit about Wooshii, your journey at Wooshii. I know we're kind of getting fairly close to the end. But can you talk a little bit about Wooshii and what your, I guess, vision for the business is,
Yeah.
And a
So
little bit about maybe, and also one thing we haven't really delved into is your process.
yeah,
So like even how you run your day, because I
yeah,
think that it's relevant to where you are right now.
yeah.
So that'd be great to and
Yeah,
dig
so
into that a little
Wooshii
bit.
is a started life as as I've sort of mentioned earlier, I was, internet's the thing that has captured my imagination through most of my adult life. So I was always always building things online, and this was something that started off with an observation, which was just very early days of YouTube. This idea that actually at that point in time, cameras, software had come so low that it actually opened up filmmaking for anyone in the world. Prior to that, what most people don't forget is that actually it was bloody expensive to have a decent camera. Digital wasn't really a thing, so you had to do it through film, and software, editing equipment was bloody expensive. So you had to have a fair whack of cash to run a film company. All of a sudden, it became democratized. Lots of people could do it. And so my view was, well, hang on a sec, there's all these people around the world that are creative, that can create brilliant stuff. There's this platform now through which people can deliver the stuff. What if I match companies to people that want to make this content? And so the original idea was it was a marketplace, sort of two-sided marketplace. Imagine, I guess, a sort of eBay, but for video makers. And that's, we built an online site, big community of video makers and animators and motion graphics people, and anyone who sort of works in film. And then on the other side, we had companies that needed those services, and we were like a market maker. We sat in the middle and connected the two and took a fee. Over the years, it's shifted its model somewhat. So we mostly work with very big enterprises. So our customers are people like Amazon and Twitch, and just goes on and on. There's hundreds of large corporates, global corporates, and we produce everything from training videos to commercial videos to ads to stings that you see on TV to the CEO doing his announcement. So we make thousands of videos a year. And sort of split across three countries. We've got an office in London, LA, and an office in Newcastle. Yeah, and so that's what the business is. That's what it became. It's a venture backed company. So I've raised multiple rounds of money from VCs. So I've been through that whole world. I understand that pretty well. And in terms of my process, what was my day look like? I mean, I have an amazing team. So, the people that, when you get to the company to a certain size, and we're not large by any stretch of imagination, we're reasonable size, but we're not large. But you still, you start finding people that are just brilliant at what they do and much better than you. So, I've got a guy who I brought in as sort of chief operating officer. He really sort of runs and drives the mechanics of the business. Great deal maker. He's been through it as well himself. He's run venture companies, had exits. So he knows the space.
He knows it. Good integrator.
He's a solid operator. Sort of drags me back to reality. I have a tendency to fly off on the next new shiny thing. And so there's him, and then we've got people that run the sales team, people that run I've got a woman who's been with me for 10 years. She runs our entire production entity. She's flipping amazing. So my day really is, I spend most of my day talking to investors or working with investors or working with those team leads just to sort of help them if I can, and just trying to think, okay, what's the next move for us? So that's mostly what my day involves. It's changed over the years. It sounds really dull, but it can be a bit dull. Someone once said to me, the job of a CEO is to, set the vision, hire great people, and make sure the company doesn't run out of money, and the rest of it will just sort of sort itself out. And it's probably not far from the truth.
It's interesting. So I guess the thing is getting good. I guess you have a good team around you, and you're an interesting person, and you're obviously very capable. So the ability to actually attract those people in the first place is a real skill. And you certainly in the early days kind of got into the entrepreneurship, had some successes, and then you kind of your marketing abilities and ability to see the gap in the market. You're obviously able to add a lot of value to those businesses that that you've served, and I know you've moved up the food chain up to kind of more blue chip corporates. But can you talk a bit about your approach to marketing? Because I think that's something, because I've always really loved whenever I've spoken to you, you seem to be really good at simplifying things to what's really important and just kind of focusing on that. And that's a real skill, but also you're obviously very in tune with the world, and maybe it's you got introduced to the internet in the early days and you kind of watched it grow. And I think just listening to you talk, you know, the scientific brain, it's almost like finding the truth, and it's almost like there's something there. But can you talk about your approach to marketing maybe, and how that ties into Wooshi, and I guess what you're delivering to clients? Is that possible?
Yeah. So I mean, there's a few things wrapped up in that question, but I think marketing takes on different roles at different types of companies. So, you know, if you're a enterprise business, you know, some scale, then it's a lot of how successful you are comes down to how well your brand is perceived, or how well brand, you know, the overall perception that people have of your business as a whole, if you like. So yeah, you can iterate around the edges with how your ads work and all the rest of it, but ultimately you're of a scale where brand becomes very, very important. So when people say to you, okay, well, vacuum cleaner, so many people will say Hoover. Like there's these sort of elements of can you drive your business into the psyche of people, and that's where it's different, because that works in a different place. You're working much more broadly, and you're trying to build awareness over much larger. By the way, I'm sweeping generalizations here. Sure. If you're a smaller business, you have to be a lot more nuts and bolts about it. So you're trying to understand, how can I drive in a customer for a set price, so that I can then convert that customer at another price, and hopefully the difference is a positive one, and ultimately is going to land in profit. And so you have to get a bit more smart about how you're going to do that. And on that front, I love it. So I'm a ferocious consumer of that sort of content. You know, even though I don't really run marketing, in fact, I don't run marketing, I still will just consume, you know, reams and reams, pages and pages, let's say, of that type of content. I'm fascinated by hacky type stuff. I love growth hacks, even though we don't really do this. I love those sorts of things. So I'm on all the forums. There's certain people that I follow. I love clever businesses where they've found some sort of arbitrage. Like all these things make, you know, to me, whilst they don't necessarily then end up in action, they inform my view on what and how we're doing things. So I think that would be one thing, is just be, you know, just a voracious sort of consumer of that type of content, because it interests me. You know, I find it interesting.
Sorry, I'm just saying, when you consume content, sorry to interrupt, you're intentional about it, because we can mindlessly consume content, and it doesn't actually necessarily lead to anywhere unless it's subconscious. But am I understanding that when you do consume the content is it intentional? I mean, as far as actually helping move the needle, or you just a general consumer? Do you mean that you consume it for a reason, or do you just love it?
Yes and no.
All the time?
I consume.
You see the distinction?
Yes, I mean, it's the people the people that I tend to listen to or follow will often output the types of thing that I think are interesting. You know, I don't just, you know, read, say, you know, certain pieces of information, but I will. That doesn't make any sense. I guess there's a number of people that I'll listen to their podcasts or read their posts, or, you know, follow their Twitter feeds, and because I know that they're going to output at various points interesting nuggets, and I'm sort of always just looking for those. And I think that's it's more about who I'm following rather than what I'm looking for, because I'm not like sort of out there
fair enough.
for it. It just sort of comes along.
Okay. So you're reacting to content that you've made obviously a choice to follow.
Correct.
Do you manage that? Do you prune it? Do you ever kind of do you just keep adding, or do you cut away the stuff that's not relevant anymore?
Yeah, I add an ad, and then I'll never listen to it and cut it. I always end up listening to the same things, which is terrible. Like that's So I still read a lot of books, so that sort of keeps me broad.
Okay.
But if I go into the car, I'll have, there's the same podcasts, and I'm always disappointed if there's not one there to listen to, because then I have to listen to one of the others. Or there'll be an audio book that I'll have on. But my podcast list is pretty short and small. And in fact, if you looked at it, you'd see, sort of looking at it now, it would be like I've got maybe 10 on there, and I know that actually 7 of those I never listen to. So it's like,
what's your favorite? What's your favorite podcast? Can you share that?
At the moment, I really like the My First Million guys. What's his name? Sean Furry and Sam. Can't remember his second name. Those 2 guys I think are great.
Okay.
Because it's all ideas, and they're both very smart. They break down business really well. I really like the All In podcast, but I guess lots of people do that now. I used to listen, Jason Calacanis I sort of grew up with. I sort of feel like I grew up with Jason Calacanis. So yeah, they're my sort of go-tos. Peter Diamandis is the one that I'm sort of really liking at the moment. He sort of founded X Prize. He's got
yeah. Have you I've listened to the World of Greatness. Is it?
Oh yes, no, I've listened to a few of his.
Something. Yeah. Someone Howes, is it? I can't remember.
I've listened to a few of his.
American one, and the Tim Ferriss one. I listened to
Tim Ferriss. I used to listen to every single one of his, but now I sort of dip into him. It's like I just sort of see who's he interviewing.
I haven't done it for years.
Yeah, so every so often I'll go back. He did a great one recently with Bill Gurley, which was great. But I'm sort of off and on with Tim Ferriss. But that's because he's interviewed everyone, so it's sort of you're at a point now where he's sort of, well, who's left? Been
there, done that. Yeah. I think I liked his one with Jim Collins,
right?
And so basically you consume content that's useful, and it sounds like no dead time. If you're driving, you're always learning, which is interesting.
Yeah. Driving, I find sorry, say that again.
No, I was going to say fiction or non-fiction books, or a mix.
Fiction. I used to have a rule, which was that on the way to work it was fiction, on the way home from work it was it was not, on the way to work it was non-fiction, on the way home it was fiction.
I like it.
And the rule was it had to be a classic. So there was one point in time where I listened to things like I did like Gulliver's Travels. I did just a load of like Dracula, all these sort of like classic novels. So I just thought there's so many books that everyone knows, but probably has never read. So I went through all these sort of classic books, loads of them. Count of Monte Cristo, that was one of the absolute crackers. I was like, that's such amazing, bloody long, but
really?
It was great. I sort of realized why these books were so well revered, but you sort of know the stories, but you actually don't until you've read them. So I did that for a period, but now I don't drive as much. So not so much fiction, to be honest.
Great. No, it's interesting. So if you could give some advice for our listeners, just based on your experience in life or as an entrepreneur, what would that be? Some parting wisdom.
I don't know if I have much parting wisdom, but I think maybe it would be exactly that, which is I would take every advice you get with a massive pinch of salt. It's all right to collect this information, but so much advice given is just full of bias. And I hear when you run a company which has got quite a lot of investors, as I do, you get advice left, right, and center from everyone, and you basically just have to sort of ignore most of it. It's just so dependent on what their experience was, how they did things. I think advice is a difficult
overrated
one. Overrated maybe. I don't know, maybe I'm just being
well, you need so follow your gut basically. So you take the advice, but you got to follow your
own mind up,
instinct.
Because you have to live with you. They can nick off and do whatever they're going to do next, but you've got to live with your decisions. So not particularly wise.
Yeah, that's really good advice. No, it's good advice. Another question that I ask folks is if you were to have someone that you could meet for coffee, who would that be? And you never know. If I hook you up,
dead or alive.
Well, let's go for alive. Alive.
Alive.
We can do both if you like. If you know who you'd want to meet if they're dead, then let's do both.
If they were, if they're alive, then Bill Gates, I think, would just be fascinating. Who else? Peter Diamandis. I wouldn't mind meeting him. He's sort of right in my sphere of interest. So those two, I think. If dead, someone like, I don't know, Da Vinci or something. You know what I mean? That sort of way you think someone's just like outstanding. I guess yeah, that would be mine. So we could set that up. That'd be great.
That's brilliant. So how do folks contact you or reach you?
LinkedIn is probably my sort of area. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. That's where to find me. Okay, perfect. And is there anything that you're looking for that Rocket Pod can help with? Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I mean, if there's anyone out there who's interested in the video space, then that's where we're at. So, I'm always looking for good people, as well as customers. So, either of those things are useful to us. But yeah, if there's people listening that are interested in the video space, then certainly reach out. Perfect. Excellent. Good. Well, thanks, Fergus, for your time. It's been fascinating learning about your experiences and kind of how you kind of run your life and business. I know we kind of probably just scratched the surface today, but it's been really nice to have you on. So thank you for your time and graciousness this morning. No problem at all. And maybe we catch up with you in a few years and see where things are at. Yes, maybe. Yes. Great. Perfect. All right, James. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Rocket Pod. When you get a moment, we'd love it if you could jump over to Apple Podcasts and Spotify and leave a quick review. Follow us on social. We love all your messages. It helps us get exposure to inspire and share more stories like this one with you, our listeners. And of course, big thanks to Fergus for his time and graciousness today. We learned some pretty cool things, I think. Read, consume content intentionally so you can control what you consume, and obviously take advice with a pinch of salt. Kind of follow your instincts and try new things. It went from the crazy entrepreneurial experiences in Fergus's early life to building more of a robust, scalable technology business that he runs today. So we're all on a journey, and it's interesting to hear Fergus's story, and perhaps we can take some key takeaways and find some things that we can do for fun to de-stress ourselves and obviously keep fit and active. Anyway, take care. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.